Patriots all over the Western free world, from Britain to the United States, to France to Poland. Please do not listen to those populists who do not support Ukraine. Only listen to us in the White House and Downing Street. You've seen the evildoers from Nigel Farage to David Curtin to all the anti-vaxxers stifling our full support towards Ukraine. Only Biden or Rishi Sunak or Macron and us establishment politicians could do the job and finish the war and defeat Russia once and for all.
It is often said that the only people that support Ukraine are the Western elites. One can simply observe the litany of op-eds in the New York Times or the Telegraph or whatnot. That a lot of the Western elites that we know are very supportive of Ukraine, or at least when compared to, let's say, Vivek Ramaswamy, one of the candidates for the GOP nomination in 2024 for the US presidential election, or over in France, Marine Le Pen, and in Germany, the nearly emerging AfD, who is first or second in the polls at the moment, as we speak, alongside people like Viktor Orban in Hungary, who are either very skeptical of further aid to Ukraine, if not outright sympathetic to the Russian outlook and viewpoints of the war. Well, this is not what I've found, or what I've researched over the past month or so. And there's actually more similarities between both camps than you might think. I am making this series because I often see a lot of the right wings and those that oppose the political establishment oppose aid to Ukraine. In my view, a lot of people who oppose aid are misguided, whether left or right. But I just want to tell you, those who deny aid or reject the idea of supporting Ukraine, is that your policies are actually not too different from the establishment that you rightly deride on many other issues, from COVID to unrestricted free trade, immigration, and so much more. I was never pro-Russia, but due to the demoralization over COVID and my concerns over another foreign policy failure by the West, especially in the aftermath of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, I was very skeptical of the US intentions for the Ukraine conflict. And I believed the narrative that the Ukraine Euromaidan was a coup. Now, I wasn't into conspiracies when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, but I just accepted the fact because everyone on the right-wing media was promoting this fact, and I thought that was the simply basic factual information, rather than Russian disinformation. For more clarity of the aforementioned and why I've changed my mind on the subject, I've written about this in a Substack of mine, and the link for this will be in the description. Of course, before we discover the similarities between both the establishment and the pro-Putin right-wingers, here is a general appeal to conservatives and right-wingers in general not to support Putin and Russia. A lot of sympathy for Russia, especially in conservative circles, seems to be based on the perception or the misconception that he's on the right, he's like them, he's on their side, and that Russia is a Christian nation and ditching communism and the old Soviet legacy, or that he rejects illegal immigrants and refuses to diversify his nation with minority groups, or that Russia is a check on the liberal Western United States gay empire, or the World Economic Forum. Polling has also showed that populist parties are more likely to have a favorable view of Vladimir Putin and Russia, and are more likely to support economic ties with the Russian Federation. And people still repeat those lies, even when Russia is flying hammer and sickle flags in the occupied Ukrainian regions, and that it has still a lot of communist legacy statues and flags inside Russia, including Lenin's mausoleum, which hasn't been taken down, or a decommunization process similar to the Nuremberg trials, which were established to atone and put on trial all those who did wrong. As for the immigration issue and the diversity issue, have any of those right-wingers not observed the immigration figures to Russia prior to the invasion? Prior to the invasion, or even the COVID crisis, Russia is the third most country that people immigrate to, with most of it coming from the ex-Soviet Union nations, especially those with Muslim majorities. Putin even hailed diversity as a foundation of Russia's strength. And in the aftermath of the Russian Crocus City Hall terror attack, Putin literally stated in an address of his that terrorists, murderers, those inhumane individuals who have no nationality, no force will be able to sow the poisonous seeds of discord, panic, or disunity in our multi-ethnic society. Russia also has a sizable Muslim population, which numbers around 14 million, or roughly 10% of the Russian population, which is worse than some European nations. The chief mufti of Russia even predicted in 2019 that Russia would be 1/3 Muslim in 15 years, by the year 2034. And Russia is no friend of white European civilization, as shown by its relationship to Chechen warlord Razam Kadyrov, and him sending thousands of Muslim fighters to fight white Christians and white people in Ukraine. Russia is also sending migrants from the Third World to Poland, Lithuania, and other Eastern European nations, which nations such as Finland and others have to reinforce their borders to prevent Russia from exploiting future migration waves. If one still needs more proof, just look at Russia's alliance with Iran, alongside Hamas and the PLO, and for pushing anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism in the region.
KGB planted the seed by distributing an Arabic translation of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, along with documentary material proving that the United States was a Zionist country whose aim was to start a new crusade on the Islamic world. Thousands of copies were disseminated throughout the Middle East.
Kids in many Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries, read the protocols. The textbooks have references to the protocols as if this is the real, reliable document.
The terrorist war came into action at the end of 1968, when the KGB transformed airplane hijacking into an instrument of terror. Before 1969 came to an end, Palestinian terrorists, trained by the KGB, had hijacked their first El Al plane and landed it in Algeria. The hijacking had been planned and coordinated by the KGB, but to conceal his hand and drop off had the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a KGB front group, take credit for the hijacking. During the next 2 years, various KGB-trained Palestinian terrorists took credit for hijacking 13 Israeli and Western planes. All these hijackings were masterminded by the KGB.
The Soviet Union was very involved with Arab nationalists, basically from, the World War II period on, if not before. In the latter part of its lifespan, the Soviet Union began developing, and I think very aggressively engaged in supporting people who weren't so much Arab nationalists as they were Islamists or jihadists, but in some degree were the sort of follow-on, the successors to the Arab nationalists.
The cumulative effect of distributing millions of Arabic translations of the protocols in Arabic over 20 plus years throughout the Islamic world may be self-evident.
Russia's alliance with South Africa, or pushing France out of its West African spheres of influence, are very concerning, with Russia being desired to be seen as the champion of anti-colonialism. And if you haven't noticed already, the screenshotted quote could be made by a woke university student. As for the lie that Russia is some sort of bulwark against Western liberalism, Russia has some of the highest death rates from alcohol abuses in 2019. And it's likely going to be much worse now, especially after Russia declared war on Ukraine, due to the rise of death and despair and soldiers getting depressed and whatnot. Russia's alcohol addiction also plays a role in Russia's continued demographic demise. In fact, in 2012, more than 30% of all deaths in Russia were due to alcohol abuses. Russia's also not an LGBTQ-free paradise. And while it is true that Russia does crack down on some of the LGBTQ's agenda's excesses, Russia has a more unofficial problem, as shown by this report, of Russian soldiers being forced to rape each other. Moreover, allegations of the rape of civilians in Ukraine do not just extend to women and girls. And since Russia has not apologized for its Soviet Union legacy, you do know Russia has assisted in a lot of the practices that degrade Western civilization today, which some call cultural Marxism. Russia is also the first nation in the world to legalize abortion. And whilst it is true that abortion has been somewhat curtailed, it is not due to pro-life concerns, but due to the need for making soldiers in war. The Russian view of religion is also flawed, and it's not just because Putin has compared communism to Christianity. According to the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, only 1.4 million or so people attended Christmas services in 2023, which was about 1% of the Russian population. And traditionally, only 6% of Russians go to church several times a month. This makes the USA chugging along by comparison. And Russia is at least just as atheist as the UK, if not more so, as the Russian Orthodox Church has huge links with the Russian state. Not to mention Russia always using religion as a means of state policy rather than actually believing in God.
I gave you the example of a president who outlawed abortion, practically outlawed divorce, favored the family, outlawed homosexuality, reopened the church that had been persecuted by his predecessor, convoked 2 synods in order to establish the church. He brought back all the clergy that had been persecuted by his predecessor. And he called his people brothers. What would you say about such a president? You would say he was a good president, of course. Well, this president was Joseph Vissarionovich Dukashvili, better known as Stalin. Indeed, when Stalin perceived that they would have to fight a war, that he needed a strong Russia, he directly abolished abortion, he almost abolished divorce, he favored the family in order to have people, in order to have citizens from whom to make soldiers in order to fight the war. He understood that he had to govern with the Orthodox Church. So he reinstated, so he refounded the Orthodox Church that had been closed down and persecuted by his predecessor Lenin. Today, for example, if you go to St. Petersburg, the old Leningrad, and at midday you go to the Basilica of St. Peter and St. Paul, right in the center of St. Petersburg, there's a beautiful bell tower. At midday, it sounds the Russian imperial anthem. You will say, "But how can they sound the imperial anthem?" Because it's to give the idea to the people that the empire is still there. The Tsar today is called Vladimir Putin.
And of course, this means that religion and the state has been intertwined which is why Putin has signed a law which bans evangelizing outside the church, aside from the Russian Orthodox Church, of course. What is considered missionary work or evangelizing can be simply reading your Bible, singing, or simply praying outside a registered church, or even at home, is now illegal. Alarmingly, missionaries have been convicted by this law, and Russia has been suppressing religion in the occupied Ukrainian territories. And no, this isn't the same as the Ukrainian government banning the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, as the church from Russia in Ukraine had links to the Russian government, and therefore the comparisons are not apt. Putin is also not a bulwark against the WEF or the lockdown consensus during the COVID pandemic. Yes, it's true that the Davos elite has cut off ties with Vladimir Putin after the invasion. But contrary to what Vigano has stated about the same people who hate Russia are also the same people oppressing the anti-lockdown campaigners or conservatives in general. And therefore, conservatives should make a common cause with Russia if one wants to defeat Davos. Well, here is the head of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, debunking that assertion.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. That we penetrate the cabinets.
Putin has a relationship with Klaus Schwab going back to the 90s, and Putin has addressed the WEF 5 times from the year 2007 to 2021. In fact, as recently as 2021, Schwab called Putin's views and voice essential in world affairs, echoing a comment in 2009 that he could not think of a single issue that could be solved without Vladimir Putin's Russia. And Putin did not crack down on the oligarchs that partied at Davos with American CEOs and senior European politicians. And as for Putin bucking the COVID consensus and being an anti-lockdown hero, Putin introduced a vaccine passport back in 2021. And a lot of those provisions for the vaccine passport sounded awfully like the ones that you saw in the UK or wherever you are that had a lockdown back in the COVID period. I sincerely hope that those who oppose hate Ukraine, especially those who are more on the right, which I am actually, which I agree with a lot of their priorities and policies, to reconsider their position as soon as possible. And I hope this series will convince you to change your mind.